My name is Christian Packelan and I work at Blocket.
My name is Anna.
I'm Natalie. I work in VGTV.
I'm really happy to go to work and actually be working with something that has such a big impact in people's lives.
Good morning.
I work at DBA and I work with product development at Schibsted.
Explaining the news for people and giving them insights into how the world works is a really satisfying work to do.
So I'm supposed to interview Benny Andersson today. It's ahead of the release of ABBA's new album, ABBA Voyage.
I work as a business developer for FinJobs.
I work in Målarvang. Målarvang helps people create special moments.
When we manage to make the recruitment process easier, then we are actually doing something with the entire labor market. And that is something that is very meaningful to me.
These are services that are with people in their daily lives and through their lives, whether it is to read their newspaper in their morning or get a new apartment or find a new car.
And I know for a fact that so many people that I walk past are using Schibsted's products and services on a daily basis.
We are here to make a difference and build a better, more sustainable world. and it's a win-win for everyone.
I really do love my job.
Hei, folkens. Det var mye lyd. Velkommen til DIGS og til det her eventet med Schibsted. Jeg ramlet ut. Nei, nei. Dere har sikkert hørt her hver gang dere har dratt på arrangement i det siste, men det er utrolig fint å endelig kunne møtes. Begynner å bli en klisjé nå, men det en gang sånn at det er utrolig fint å faktisk kunne samles sånn som vi gjør nå, og kunne ta del i denne type arrangement. Så vi setter veldig stor pris på at dere har stilt opp til dette eventet med Schibsted. Det er ikke helt uten grunn at Schibsted er her i dag. Vi har nemlig ganske nylig inngått et partnerskap med Schibsted. Årsaken, og litt av bakgrunnen for at vi har gjort det, er jo det at Schibsted, som mange av dere kanskje kjenner til, har jo vært en aktør i innovasjonsøkosystemet i mange år, gjennom blant annet Schibsted Vekst. Men i det siste, så ganske nå nylig, så har de endret delvis strategi og har satt et tydelig fokus på investeringsarmer til Schibsted er en integrert del og er et strategisk viktig verktøy som er forankret helt på konsernnivå. Det er viktig for et miljø som vi representerer, fordi det da i kanskje enda større grad enn tidligere vil være aktuelt å se på Schibsted som en mulig investor. Det er det ene. Det andre er jo det at vi har anledning til å gjøre sånne ting som det her. Schibsted har jo cirka 6 millioner ansatte, noe sånt? Nei. Det er veldig mange ansatte. Og 6000, riktig. Og det er meget kompetente folk. Og Schibsted har jo da muligheten til å liksom plukke litt folk fra rundt omkring og gjennomføre sånne typer arrangement som det her. Og det er det vi skal få en bit av i dag. Det setter vi også veldig stor pris på, og det blir jo en del av det, liten del av det partnerskapet. Det var egentlig det jeg skulle si. Jeg håper dere får en fin kveld. Jeg håper dere tar del i diskusjonene. Dette er første gang vi har et sånn type arrangement her oppe i 5. etasjen. Det er litt av årsaken til at vi valgte å gjøre det, og fordi at det er litt koseligere, og litt sofa, og litt god stemning, og mat. Og da senker man kanskje skuldrene, og så er det kanskje dermed også enklere for oss å delta i diskusjonen underveis og i etterkant. Så da er det vel bare å kjøre show da.
Hei alle sammen, og velkommen. Det er veldig kjekt for oss, for Schibsted, å se at så mange møter opp på vår første stopp i den roadshowen vi gjør nå av Future Report. Her ser dere at det står kontaktinformasjon, og det er fordi at normalt sett så hadde vi hatt med oss flere. Dette er en ganske kul rapport som man faktisk kan ha i et håndfast i hånda si. Så hvis man er interessert i å få denne rapporten tilsendt, så send dere en mail til Ann Akselsson. Så kan dere faktisk få et trykk av den i stedet for å bare lese på internett. Men det kan dere også gjøre. Mitt navn er Lisa Marie, og jeg jobber i Schibsted med datastrategien til Schibsted i den delen som heter data og tech. Og jeg skal sy sammen den timen her med 4 ulike, veldig spennende emner. Schibsted er jo, som dere så på forrige slide, en familie av digitale brands. Vi begynte som et tradisjonelt medieselskap, og så har vi utviklet oss. Vi har utfordret selv, disruptert annonsene, så nå har jo vi blitt ledende innenfor markedsplassene, og så har vi også gått inn i litt det som Arnstein nevnte på, som investor og i growth-porteføljen. Så vi er 55 selskap cirka, og trives veldig godt der. Men Future Report, hva er det? Jeg tenker vi er jo alle interessert i det temaet, og det er derfor vi er her. Vi er interessert i teknologi, og vi er interessert i Schibsteds take på trender. Så jeg har lyst til at Ann Akselsson, som er redaktør for Future Report, kommer opp her. For jeg er nemlig litt nysgjerrig på hvorfor vi begynte med Future Report, og hva er Future Report? Hvorfor har vi en Future Report?
Ja, det är ju då en trendrapport på de områden vi tycker är spännande i de tech business och people som vi kallar den då. Men alltså jag tänker egentligen det du började med, det är ju ganska naturligt för oss. Vi är ju från början mycket media och att liksom göra bra storytelling och journalistik ligger ju i vårt DNA, så det blev ganska naturligt att göra en rapport. Men det ursprungliga behovet var ju faktiskt att dela information internt. Vi har ju väldigt många anställda, väldigt smarta människor. De var ofta ute och pratade för andra. Och så kom de hem och så frågade, men kan jag få din PowerPoint? Och sådär, liksom. Så, att dela den där informationen internt. Och sen så har det ju blivit väldigt ett bra sätt för oss att visa att vi vill ha diskussioner och vara transparenta. Det liksom är ju i vårt DNA även det. Och ett sätt att tala om lite grann vilka vi är. Mm.
Vi skal jo snart få høre 4 ulike personer som har skrevet stykke i Future Report. Men utover det, finnes det noen andre spennende artikler som du har lyst til å trekke fram?
Det är en väldigt gedigen rapport, så läs verkligen tycker jag och skicka efter den hos oss om ni vill ha den. Men jag tänker att jag ska lyfta 3 stories. Vi har en som handlar om techjättarnas dominans, skriven av en av Sveriges bästa ekonomijournalister som jobbar på Aftonbladet som kolumnist. Sen har vi en jättespännande artikel om elflyg som också är en Aftenposten-journalist som har skrivit. Och sen så finns det en story om hur viktigt det är att våra toppledare faktiskt förstår det här med klimatförändringarna. Och att när de väl inser det och att de kan påverka, det är då det kan hända grejer. Bara ett litet smakprov.
Väldigt spännande. Jeg tror samtlige her gleder seg til å gå hjem og dykke inn i Future Report.
Det hoppas jag verkligen.
Efter man har fått med
den är väldigt snygg också ska jag säga, så om ni vill ha den så mejla.
Ja, det føles behagelig å holde den i hånda. Yes. Tusen takk, Ann. Okay, I will switch to English now because our first speaker of the day is Christopher Purcell-Ross. And Christopher, he works for a team in Schibsted called the Tech Experiments team. This team looks into cool futuristic trends and is very creative and knows their tech, so to say. He will tell you all you need to know about the metaverse, and he will also be available for questions. En opplysning til alle her. Vi kommer til å ta litt spørsmål underveis, men vi kommer også til å åpne en slags question mashup til slutt. Så hvis dere tør, så må dere gjerne stille spørsmål underveis, og så ser vi litt annen tid. Men vi kommer også til å ta alt det til slutten. Anyways, Chris, we're really looking forward to hearing your take and thoughts on the metaverse.
Perfect.
Please.
Thank you. Oh. Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and hello, everyone, and welcome. I'll let the beautiful sound effects finish. So as Lisa said, my name is Christopher. I work with the Tech Experiments team at Schibsted, and we're going to take a little journey into the metaverse today. It's a bit of a nebulous concept. It's a bit hard to understand, but I think if we strap on our collective headsets and take a plunge, we might learn something new. Generally, when people talk about the metaverse today, what they're talking about is a persistent, immersive, and all-encompassing joining of our physical and digital lives, bringing together work, entertainment, marketplaces, and social spaces into one seamless experience. Now, if that sounds really vague and aspirational, that's because it is. We're going to have to break it down and make it a bit more concrete to make sense of it today. So we're going to go through some histories, current visions of what this might be. We're going to break that down into some building blocks, things that did we lose the mic? Push it closer, perfect. Break those things down into building blocks so that we can actually understand what we're working with. And then discuss how maybe my team is taking some first steps into exploring the metaverse. So first, histories. As I'm sure some of you already know, the term metaverse was coined by Neil Stephenson in this book, Snow Crash, published in 1992. The book follows a very elite hacker and sword fighter in the metaverse named Hero Protagonist, who, for his day job in the real world, delivers pizza for the mob. It's a pretty wild ride. It also is the book where we got the phrase avatar to describe our digital embodiments. But it's part of a tradition. It's part of a literary tradition that was started, and not started by, but in large part informed by William Gibson, his works Neuromancer and Johnny Mnemonic. And Snow Crash also influenced later works like The Matrix, Ready Player One, and really starts to define what we call the cyberpunk genre of science fiction. Now, one thing all of these works have in common is that the metaverse is represented as some sort of destination, some sort of three-dimensional parallel space where we can go become superheroes. We can get powers we don't have in the real world. We meet people we don't know. We can be and become things that we can't in the real world. And we do that to sort of escape our grimy, poverty-ridden lives here in the real world. So the concept of the metaverse isn't new. It's actually decades old. But what is new is the amount of investment, the pace of attention and work being done to build this concept out today. So we've gone from sort of the covers of edgy sci-fi novels to the covers of financial reports from JP Morgan. The kids who were reading William Gibson and Neil Stephenson grew up and they started tech companies, and they brought with them this sort of optimistic vision, this sort of escapist vision of what the metaverse could be. They left behind sort of the social critique and the critical perspectives, and so we ended up trading Keanu Reeves for Mark Zuckerberg. Maybe a bad trade in some cases. But there is obviously a lot of opportunity here. If you kind of cut through the hype, there's a lot of things that we can pay attention to and learn from. And so we're going to do that a little bit by looking at what some of the high-level current visions are. And we could spend, honestly, a full week talking about this, so it's going to be very high level. But the best place to start is Facebook, now Meta, who, after buying Oculus in 2014, have been trying to build out this vision of sort of a Pixar-like metaverse, accessible through VR headsets that bring together social and work spaces. Importantly, they're also working on AR headsets, haptic feedback, and neural interfaces that sort of rely on muscle signals to control things in the so-called metaverse. They're hoping that these AR headsets are kind of their next generation metaverse answer to the iPhone. They can have a leg in the hardware game. Microsoft, of course, has been doing this for a very long time with the HoloLens 2, and their Microsoft Mesh platform, and it's seeing a lot of use in military and industrial applications. That's sort of a remote assistance, remote training, and sort of a very robust industrial tool, and sort of that's been their strategy all along, with a lot of different technologies piloted in industry and then water that down into a viable commercial product for the everyday public. And of course, Apple and Google are also characteristically very, very secretively developing their own projects in this space. Another place to look a little bit deeper beyond big tech is sort of the gaming world, which is a real important part of how we're understanding the metaverse today. So one obvious example, Fortnite has been pulling in not just sort of a social gaming experience, but now hosting Coachella, it's hosting massive concerts and social experiences. They've proven sort of the economic value of selling skins and animations and accessories in a digital space, and now they're actually bringing that into the real world with partnerships with leading fashion houses like Balenciaga. So you have now the same hoodie that you can wear in the metaverse and in real life. And of course, down here we also have, oh geez, what was this one? Roblox, I think. Roblox, a social gaming platform where essentially it's a creator economy. Some of you might be familiar with. So users can create and code their own experiences, their own games, and upload those, and have people pay to play and pay to get accessories in those spaces. There's actually a lot of work. This mic is a little scratchy, but there's a lot of work behind the scenes. So we don't have time to talk about it today, unfortunately, but the sort of the infrastructure of the gaming world. So 3D gaming engines like Unity and NVIDIA, these graphics companies that are helping out developments in this space. There's a lot to talk about there. And of course, it wouldn't be a talk about the metaverse and the tech space without mentioning maybe, should I just trade with somebody? Or is it, no, of course, now it's fine. We wouldn't be at a talk about new tech if we didn't, I'll stand very still, about blockchain and crypto. So there's lots of examples here. Axes in the bottom right, sort of a Pokemon for the blockchain world where you can train and own your own monsters as NFTs. And the more powerful they get, the more you can sell them for. Decentraland and the Sandbox are applying the same sort of NFT-based technology to create artificial scarcity for digital lands. Snoop Dogg owns some property in the Sandbox. There's a lot of sort of immaturity in this space, I think, still. There's a lot that we can learn from it, but the concepts being developed here might lead to an alternative to the big tech model of walled gardens and proprietary technology with a decentralized architecture. But these kind of examples, there's a lot of them, and we could spend a lot of time talking about them, but do they actually help us understand the metaverse any differently? I don't think they do. John Radoff has said that the metaverse is a word that conjures different meanings to people. To some, it's an immersive virtual reality experience with a persistent landscape. To others, it's a specific technology stack. And to some, it's a vision of future society. And so I really agree with this statement, and I think it's still a very wishy-washy topic to talk about. And I think it really echoes, for those of us who grew up in the 90s and even earlier, it echoes the way that we talked about the metaverse. Sorry, it echoes the way we talked about the information superhighway and cyberspace back in the 80s and 90s. This really optimistic time where we were talking about the power of nets and democratizing technology. And I think, looking back 30 years from now, will our current visions of the metaverse seem just as naive? Probably. We're probably getting a lot wrong right now. We're probably getting a few things right. So how can we cut through all of that hype and focus on exploring opportunities, things that we can actually do here and now? That's where these building blocks come in. So writers like Matthew Ball, who's also a venture capitalist, so take some of his perspective with a grain of salt, have identified 7 core enablers of the metaverse. They include things like hardware developments, computational power, networking, virtual platforms, interchange tools and standards, payment services, and of course, content services and assets. And all of that is wrapped up around user experiences and user interfaces and behaviors. Similarly, John Radoff has talked about exploring 7 layers of the metaverse, from infrastructure to human interface, decentralization, spatial computing, a creator economy, discovery, and experience. I really hope the people on the live stream can hear the seagull at the door. That's great. John Radoff is a CEO of a company that makes products that support the gaming industry. So also, like when he talks about creator economy and all of these things, he's also talking from a very specific perspective. So there's a lot of frameworks like this. I really recommend you check them out and read them if you're interested in sort of bringing some structure into your thinking about the metaverse. But they can all be boiled down into sort of these 3 key uncertainties. First is technology, the next is power structures, and finally experience. So I'm going to take you through each of these. In terms of technology, the metaverse, as we talk about it today, is enabled by things like consumer interfaces. This is where a lot of the hype is coming in. AR, VR wearables. It's enabled by ambient computing. So things, a great example of that would be Alexa, these sort of computational services that are happening passively in the background. Generative media and AI, new ways of creating content. Spatial computing and 3D engines, new ways of building new worlds. Web 3.0, decentralization and interoperability. So can we bring something we own in one digital space into another freely? How do we track that ownership and enable that transfer? And finally, sort of the computational power, right? So 5G, 6G, edge and cloud computing that are going to enable a lot of these really tech-intensive services. Now, we know a lot about this technology as individual pillars, but what we don't know is what's happening in the middle, the sort of emergent qualities that will arise when all of these technologies are sort of fully realized. When it comes to power structures, this is something that applies to everything from the marketplaces and the economy that we have in a metaverse, to the regulatory structure that kind of governs it, to the tech infrastructure that enables it. We have sort of a really heavily centralized walled garden where there's Facebook's metaverse and Apple's metaverse, and you kind of have to pay to play in either one. Or will we have a more decentralized or even distributed system of multiple metaverses that we can step into and step out of as we want? And finally, I snuck in one last Keanu GIF. User experience is a really important part of this. And the way I like to break this down when thinking about the metaverse is this. We have sort of high immersion and low immersion experiences, and we have destination experiences and those experiences that are really integrated into our daily lives. So a good example is TikTok. We carry it around in our pocket. We can look at it on the train or on the toilet, but it's not very immersive. It's on our mobile phone. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have something like an IMAX film where we drive a car to get there, we pay for a ticket, we sit down, and that's the only thing we do at that particular destination. So when we start applying some early signs of the metaverse to this, what we see is a similar breakdown, something like Pokemon Go, which brings our sort of artificial Pokemon experiences into augmented reality. It's also in our pocket. It's in a wristwatch that just gives you passive notifications. But when you strap on a headset, a VR headset, that's a destination. You have to sort of turn off the rest of the world, put on the goggles, and that's the experience you're having in that moment. And we can apply this same framework to all of our sort of key user interfaces, everything from print media, desktop, and mobile, which is where Schibsted has sort of built the core of their services and experiences, through to things like voice assistants, AR glasses, and VR goggles. And so the big question for companies like Schibsted, which has a really strong legacy in not only print media, desktop, and now mobile services, is how do we keep that sort of core of what we offer, taking a few initial steps into the world of voice assistants, and maybe even into the world of sort of AR glasses. What kind of experiences do those unlock, and what new opportunities do those create for our users? That's kind of where my team steps in. We're the sort of emerging interfaces team of Schibsted. So we are a team of 2 designers, 2 developers, a trainee, trend analysts, and we focus on asking sort of very fundamental research questions and exploring those with hypotheses. We do everything from short fiction writing to video sketches like you saw there, to actually fully functioning prototypes with code, and that might be implemented with our brands. And so we're trying to take little steps here and there to iteratively experiment with some of this new technology. Leave you with 3 recommendations for how you might start to engage with the metaverse a little differently yourselves. The first would be to take that critical view of these emerging visions. Don't just believe the Zuckerberg hype, but critically engage with it and take a step farther. Try to understand the trends and the building blocks that are actually enabling these new developments. And then finally, if you can, take an iterative research and experimental approach. Get your hands dirty, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's just making a character in Roblox and walking around and feeling what it's like to interact that way yourselves. It's been a very big topic for a very short period of time, so I'll thank you for that and leave you with this. If you want, these are some of the resources that went into informing the talk. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Super interesting, right? Do we have any questions from the audience? We can take them in the end. But do we want this? Don't we want to live in the real world?
That's a question that I think we ask ourselves quite a lot. But that's kind of where the hype, this sort of the quadrants that I think about, a lot of the hype is in this really intensive, sorry for those on the live stream, the hype is in this really intensive sort of IMAX style experience where you strap on a headset and you're in the metaverse. But I really think most of our experiences with whatever the metaverse becomes will be actually across the bottom of that breakdown, which was sort of low immersion, basically like everything from checking out something on your mobile phone to having an audio conversation with a home assistant. So I think the way that we think and envision the metaverse is maybe kind of extreme at the moment, and the real reality of it will be, I think, a bit more immersed in our real lives. I hope it'll be a bit more immersed in our real lives and in the real world. If not, we have some questions to answer, I think.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Now there's one question in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The short video that played there was a video sketch of implementing sort of spatial computing into Finn. So instead of getting some two-dimensional pictures, you would actually get a three-dimensional capture of the product you're trying to buy. You could throw that into augmented reality just on your phone and see, okay, does this couch look good in our house or not? And that's just sort of like a very incremental example of how we're sort of using that technology to explore new spaces. That example is 4 years old. So since then, we've experimented with computer vision in Finn. There's actually a copy of our chief technology officer, a deepfake that is very, very convincing and has been used in some meetings internally to sort of prove the point that synthetic media is going to be a really important thing. But there's a lot more coming. Our team is pretty new. We just are kind of getting off the ground the last 6 months in this new format, and it's pretty exciting. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So is it okay, by the way, that we continue in English? We got some feedback there, some English speaking in the room. Great. We'll take fixed rates in Norwegian, but the rest will be in English. And you can ask questions in Norwegian. But in the report, there's an essay about this project called Project Horizon. In this project, they look at trends and scenarios to assess how Schibsted are to handle and tackle the future. And we have Susanna Seglado here, who's who's the technology strategy lead in Schibsted, to talk about how we work with this method in Schibsted. And we call this for foresighting work. So this, in the Future Report, Susanna has written this together with Anders Grimstad, who is also working with foresight in Schibsted, but within the tech experiments team that Chris is working in as well. So Susanna, please come to the stage.
Thank you. Feels like a jungle. Okay, hello everyone. Really nice to be here. Thank you for a great introduction, Lisa. I'm here today to talk to you about the future and how we can work with the future and sort of decode it and rehearse it. So I think we could start the talk just by doing a little warm-up. If you can take up your phones, if you can get the Slido up here, I would like to ask you, like, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word future? So if I can get the Slido up, you can scan the QR code and just let's make a word cloud. I would like to see what is your like first, what's coming to your word to your mind when you hear this word. Then it gets, yeah, I can shout out, yes, go ahead. Possibilities, I heard. Yes, technology. Change, cool, yeah. Use either the code or you can use go to slido.com and just put the 264991. And you can submit more than one word. Now you had a few moments to think about it, so I hope you have a lot of words that come to your mind. War and cybersecurity, some distant thinking. Say metaverse, cool. Uncertainty, yeah, that was the one I was looking for. Change, Cool. Zombie apocalypse. Yeah, that was interesting. Tech dystopia. I think we have a tech-savvy publicum today. Okay, some of the words are positive, some are a bit more negative. Possibilities, autonomy, AI, cool. Let's give a few more seconds. So, sustainability, smart, green, global warming, cool. Okay, the ones that are coming up most is the change, uncertainty. That's a really good one. I will talk about it a bit more. And the unknown. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Okay, so yeah, I think there's a lot of good associations, and I think one conclusion we can draw out from it is that there's so many things that come to your mind when you think about the future, and unknown and uncertainty is one of the words that are coming up very often. So I think we can just sum it up that saying that the only thing that is certain about the future is that it's impossible to predict. So I would love to bring with me today a crystal ball and look into this and tell you what is happening in 10 years. But the reality is that nobody is able to do it. Even if you are the world's best futurist, it's not possible to predict it because there's so many variables, there's so many things happening, that are outside of your control, too many data. It's impossible to say what the future will exactly look like in 5 or 10 years in the future. But then you can ask yourself, okay, should we then just give up on that and, don't think about it, go with the flow and just, see whatever is happening? Well, it's actually scientifically proven that companies that rehearse the future, so if you can go back to the presentation, the companies that rehearse the future and build what is called a future preparedness, they are more successful, they are more profitable, and they grow faster than regular companies. So rehearsing the future is actually something everybody should do. And there is a technique for that is called foresight. And it provides a set of tools that you can use to reduce the uncertainty and work with the future in a structured way. So just to put the foresight in the perspective of different other activities you can do in the company, foresight is the one, if you look at this time cone, foresight is the thing that is most into the future. It lives very closely to the trend research. So it's about, observing the signals that you see in everyday life, deduct some patterns out of it, and then, do some foresight work to sort of create the vision of how the future might look like. And then you have experiments. They live a bit closer to now. It's like you reduce the uncertainty by deciding to do some experiments. And maybe at a certain point of time, you have pretty good view of a new tech trend who is coming. And you can say, okay, now it's the time we can actually make a decision and create a strategy and say, okay, that is the direction we are going. And then you have tactics that is sort of your plan. What are we doing now and maybe the next 2 years? So foresight is the thing that is most out to the future. And who is doing foresight? Well, everybody can do it, but it is something that needs to be trained. It's a bit like a muscle. If you do it more often, you can do it more easily. And those who are professionals, we call them for futurists. So it's not fortune tellers, but they are futurists. And those people explore the possible and preferable futures that emerge from the present. And this is pretty important because futurists are not just, waking up in the morning, looking out of the window and think what might happen tomorrow, and this is the scenario I will create. They actually very systematically go through what kind of signals there are today, what we can observe, what we can measure, what kind of data we can see today, and out from this data, deduct a trend. So just to give you an example, maybe you have heard about the virtual influencer, Lil Michaela. Maybe you're following her on Instagram or TikTok. Anybody heard about her? Lily Michaela, yeah, some people are nodding. Yes, good. So she's a generated avatar. If you haven't heard about it, Google her. She's a generated avatar. She's just 19 years old, looking a girl. But I mean, she's not a girl. I mean, she's an avatar. She does not exist. But she has a profile on Insta, and you can follow her. And she actually in 2020, or she or this or the company who created Lily Michaela, they earned $11 million on a avatar, on a person who does not exist, on a virtual influencer. But this is a data point. So you look at it and you think, okay, how those influencers, how those digital avatars might look in the future, and what they can do, what kind of economy can grow around it, you know. So this is how the futurists work, and to describe the future, the possible future that may happen, they use scenarios. So scenarios are narratives that describe how the world can look in, like, say, 5 or 10 years ahead. Let me pause here. That anybody of you, have you worked with scenarios in your organization, or did you had some projects? Yes. What was the time perspective for your scenarios? Yeah. Cool. Anybody else have been working with scenarios? No? Okay. But yeah, so scenarios, yeah, you can do different scenarios. You can actually agree in your company, depending a little bit on what are you trying to do or what kind of projects you're working on. But you can take a perspective, you know, 5, 10, 15, even 20 years if you want. But the more you go to the future, the less, so the more uncertainty you have. So the scenarios are more and more vague, maybe in a way. So 5 years, 8 years sounds really cool, and that's sort of a bit where we were working on Horizon in Schibsted as well. And to create a scenario, there are actually, you know, I can give you, how much time do I have? I can give you a very quick cookbook on how to create a scenario, and it includes 3 ingredients. So it's the reperception. Reperception is the ability to look at something today and think how this object or this thing can be used differently in the future. So a little bit like with this example of Liv Michaela, you know, she's a digital avatar influencer today, but, you know, what this kind of creation could do in the future, what kind of, you know, new model, business model could be created around this kind of events. And then you have uncertainties. There's a little typo here. So uncertainties are things that are outside of your control that can influence your company or yourself to a certain extent. They can be economical, like, for example, a new inflation area, or, you know, oil prices going down, you know, something you don't really have control over, but that can influence your company. They can be regulatory. For example, is EU going to create regulations for metaverse or not? We don't know, but it's something that is also outside of our control. And then there are the wild cards. So the person putting the zombie apocalypse in the word cloud, you figure out the wild card is something that is completely sort of disruptive in a way. Let's imagine that, you know, a company tomorrow will, a pharmaceutical company will invent a pill that might extend, you know, our human lives by 20 or 50 years. You know, it's something that will completely, it's a total game changer, or that we might get contact with the aliens at a certain point of time. We are, you know, listening to space and trying to make contacts in at least the last 60 years. Maybe somebody will respond at a certain point of time, how this would change the whole world. So they are a bit more far-fetched, but they can also be a bit more down to earth, like a new pandemic, for example, or a big cyber attack that will, you know, take all Scandinavia, for example, out of game. So those are the 3 ingredients, and you put them together, and then you create the scenarios. And in Schibsted, when working on the Horizon project, we created 5 scenarios in total, but those 3 are the ones I would like to bring today. They all are around the metaverse that Chris was talking about. So they talk about the synthetic revolution, so how the synthetic media, how more of the content in the future will be produced by machines and not people. So writing articles, generating pictures. You have maybe heard about DALL-E 2. It's a newly announced system, AI system for OpenAI, where you can talk to it and say, paint me a picture of 2 teddy bears sitting on the moon and doing some gaming. And then it just, from the description, literally gives you the picture of it. So that's, you know, that's the synthetic revolution, how machines will create synthetic content. Then we have the omnipresent connections, talking about new devices, emerging interfaces, how those will change the way people interact with content. And then we have conscious consumption that talks a lot about the circular economy and how in the future, maybe every company will be actually demanded to, show the entire value chain and how, the products are produced, and is it the whole value chain sustainable in a way? So that's the scenarios from the Horizon project. And just to give you one very concrete example, because the scenario can be very vague, they can be pretty broad, but they can also be pretty precise. So one thing we were talking about in the Horizon project was about this monetization thing. So if you think like in the future, let's say metaverse is there, we created a world where everybody could be whatever they want in the metaverse. So everybody could have like 10 or hundreds, even avatars, versions of itself, but all connected to one identity. So I could have like hundreds of Susannas that are different in every different world, and they will have different capabilities, so maybe some superpowers or something like that. And then I could find out that I can actually monetize on those. So maybe my avatar in one metaverse will be very popular and have some records, maybe the time of the game, then I could actually sell it or sell the capabilities that I built there of the avatar. Or maybe other one would have like the perfect voice that I always wanted to have. And maybe I can, sell this one in for someone who would like to probe my voice to use it for its own avatar, or do something around it. So that's sort of the future that we are describing. And then we are thinking, okay, what does it mean for Schibsted? So do we need, for example, new marketplaces where we don't sell physical goods, but where people sell digital assets, and not only NFTs, like the NFTs we see them today, but maybe that will be like attributes to people that are, purely digital. And then maybe you can even co-own it. So I could co-own, if Adele is my favorite singer, maybe I could co-own a piece of the voice of Adele that I can use in some metaverse, to create my own avatar. So that's how we've been working with the scenarios. So the point of it is that it's impossible to predict the future. You can rehearse it. You can create different scenarios around it. And the thing is that it helps you, however the future unfolds, it helps you actually to be better prepared, because you have been mentally through an exercise where you have been or visited those different worlds. And maybe it made you think like, what can I do today to be better prepared for this future? So I'll just finish it up with my favorite quote from Bill Gates that says that most of the people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but strongly underestimate what is possible to do in 10 years. So I will encourage you all, think more about how the future could look like in 10 years, because I think it will help you to make smart decisions today for you and for your business. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. That was very interesting. So now I will switch back to Norwegian. Innledningsvis så snakker vi om at Schibsted er en familie av digitale brands. Den familien består av 55 selskap i dag, der vi blant annet, vi har de tradisjonelle mediene, så dere kjenner til, og så har vi markedsplassene. Og så har vi en tredjedel som er growth-delen, eller startups og selskap som vi har investert i. Og de selskapene vi har investert i, de befinner seg på ulike lokasjoner. Men vi er veldig heldige, for vi har fått med oss Fixrate her i dag. Fixrate sitter i Trondheim, men det sitter faktisk her på DIGS. Så det er veldig stas at Sigurd har lyst til å komme hit for å snakke om utviklingen av markedsplassene på internett. Det er jo noe som vi som jobber i Schibsted, de som kjenner til Schibsted sin historie, kan kjennes igjen i. Så det blir veldig spennende å høre Fixrate sitt take og Sigurd sitt take på den utviklingen. Vær så god.
Takk for det. Jeg ser at du kanskje trenger en... Det er fint å bli introdusert med sånn fin musikk. Jeg kommer jo også fra Fixrate, som
Det ble sagt her, så holder vi til i bygget her. Vi holder til rett under her. Vi en liten startup. 16 personer. Vi vokser så fort vi kan, men vi har holdt på siden 2017. Og det vi driver med en markedsplass for bankinnskudd. Altså et nettsted, da, for å si det helt konkret, hvor bedrifter som har veldig mye penger som de skal sette i banken, kan finne banker som interessert i å ta imot veldig mye penger, og kanskje gi en god rente. Det et veldig smalt tema. Vi kommer aldri til å få like mange brukere som TikTok, men det også et veldig viktig tema. Saken at denne typen penger, når vi snakker om store bankinnskudd, så snakker vi om innskudd på 50 millioner, 100 millioner og sånn. Dette penger som vanligvis kommer fra store bedrifter på Østlandet, og som havner i forretningsbankene, de største 3-4 forretningsbankene i Norge på Østlandet. Det vi gjør at vi åpner opp gjennom vår markedsplass for at banker over hele landet, vi har over 100 banker i Norge, skal få tilgang til disse pengene. Og så åpner vi opp for at bedrifter kan sette inn penger i disse bankene. Og forhåpentligvis få en bedre rente. Da snakker vi om, ikke sant, hvis vi snakker om en forbedret bankrente på for eksempel 1%, da, så er det ganske mye hvis du har satt 100 millioner i banken. Vi har holdt på en stund. Vi har lykkes i å plassere og formidle over 30 milliarder kroner. Så det er veldig mye penger som liksom renner gjennom systemet, og vi er en ganske vellykket bedrift. Men det jeg tenkte jeg skulle fortelle om, det at det var ikke sikkert at det hadde kommet til å blitt sånn. Jeg skal fortelle om en erkjennelse som jeg gjorde underveis, eller ganske tidlig egentlig, heldigvis da, i prosessen. Og som jeg er veldig glad for at Brynjar, det er han som er liksom den opprinnelige gründeren, idéhaveren, at han hadde den erkjennelsen og sto så sterkt på den. Og for å forklare det, så er det lurt, tror jeg, at vi må, at vi må snakke om hvordan markedsplasser på internett har utviklet seg, hvor de står igjen i dag, og hvor de er på vei inn. En måte å snakke om det på er å si at det består av at det har skjedd over 4 faser. Markedsplasser, hvis vi tenker på hva en markedsplass er, i hvert fall som fra middelalderen, så er det et sted hvor folk møtes. Det er et sted hvor alle som har noe å tilby kommer, og så kommer de som skal kjøpe noe. Og det første lille steget til markedsplasser på internett, det var det vi kan kalle for listingtjenester. En sånn kjent listingtjeneste, eller i hvert fall i USA veldig kjent listingtjeneste, er det som kalles for Craigslist. Det er en liste over alle som tilbyr noe innenfor hvert område. Det ligner litt på gule sider. Det er på en måte bare en oversikt over tilbydere. Og det er nok noe som man ville ha tenkt på som en markedsplass i 95 når det her kom da. Men egentlig så ligner det jo mer på sånne rubrikkannonser. Fordi hvis vi tenker på en markedsplass i middelalderen, så var det jo sånn at i og med at alle bøndene kom inn på markedsplassen, så fikk man jo en oversikt selvfølgelig over hva som var tilbudt. Ok, her går det an å kjøpe gulrøtter, og her har de epler og sånn. Men allerede på middelalderen så var det jo fremdeles sånn at du trengte jo ikke å gå ut til gården for å kjøpe de eplene. Her, hvis du finner en annonse for epler her, så må du jo reise til et lavt sted, og så må du jo inspisere, og kanskje har du ikke noen epler igjen, og så videre. Og det leder jo til neste fase i denne utviklingen, som var det vi kan kalle interaktive plattformer. Som er interaktive annonseplattformer, egentlig. Og her jeg sa jo nå innledningsvis at det er 4 faser her. På fase 2 så befinner veldig mange av dagens markedsplasser fremdeles. Det vi fikk med de her markedsplassene, det er, for det første så er det en kategorisering av varene, sånn at det blir lett å søke. Du kan for eksempel filtrere og finne alle biler som er en Toyota Avensis 1993-modell. Og du har jo også en form for matching-tjeneste, sånn som vi ser på det bildet fra Momondo, hvor du sier at jeg skal fra Oslo til Kreta, hvilke fly eller hvilke kombinasjoner av fly som sender meg dit. Og du kan også ha sånne anbefalinger som vi ser et bilde av der også. Så det ganske mye interaktivitet der, veldig mye søking, men du kan fremdeles ikke gjennomføre kjøpet. Det var det her jeg trodde vi skulle lage. Når Brynja kom til meg og snakket, eller når vi var flere da, så var det her jeg så for meg. Vi nødt til å lage en plattform hvor det går an for banker å annonsere etter penger, og for store bedrifter å finne ut av hvilke banker som kan ta imot pengene mine. Hvis vi hadde laget det, så hadde det ikke kommet til å gå bra i det hele tatt. Fordi det her løser bare halvparten av problemet. Det finnes en slik plattform for bankinnskudd, og for lån, og for strømavtaler og så videre. Riktig nok for private og ikke for bedrifter, men den heter jo finansportalen.no. Og hvis vi tenker nå, hvis hver og en her nå går på finansportalen.no og søker etter det aller beste lånet de kan få, huslånet, så vil det ta 60 sekunder, og så har de et forslag til et huslån i en bank som bedre enn det de har i dag. Og hvis det hadde tatt 60 sekunder å få et bedre huslån, da det jo ingen grunn til å ikke gjøre det hver morgen. Starte med kaffekoppen og flytte lånet sitt til den banken som har det beste huslånet akkurat i dag. Men det tar jo selvfølgelig ikke 60 sekunder. Det tar veldig mye lengre tid. Du må fylle ut. Først må du jo gå til, på en eller annen måte henvende deg til banken. Og så skal banken komme med et tilbud. Og så skal det fylles ut papirer, så skal det signeres, så skal du fylle... hva mer må du gjøre? Du må antagelig ordne en eller annen sånn betalingsordning eller og så videre. Og det her tar jo lang tid. Det her kalles for transaksjonskosten. Og det er en betydelig friksjon hvis du har tenkt å prøve å lage et effisient marked, altså et marked hvor kundene reelt sett hele tiden har all informasjon tilgjengelig og faktisk benytter seg av de beste tilbudene hele tiden. Banker snakker veldig ofte om at de har veldig lojale kunder. Virkeligheten er at de har kunder som ikke orker å bytte. Fordi det er så mye friksjon i den bytteprosessen. Og det var det Brynjar så. Han sa det at hvis bedrifter skal være nødt til å håndtere det her byttet selv, så vil de aldri komme til å gjøre det. For om det her er vanskelig for privatpersoner, så skal jeg si at det er veldig mye vanskeligere for bedrifter. Schibsted er for øyeblikket i en prosess hvor vi har søkt om å få lov til å bli kunde i DNB. Den søknaden tar en stund. Så det vi gjorde, det var at vi laget noe som tilhører fase 3, nemlig handelsplattformer. En handelsplattform er på samme måte som en markedsplass, et sted hvor du kan finne ulike leverandører og så videre. Men i tillegg til å lete opp de leverandørene og presentere dem for brukeren, så håndterer de også selve transaksjonen hvor du skal kjøpe. Og gode eksempler på det er jo et veldig godt eksempel i Uber. Et kjempegodt eksempel. Eller kanskje et enda bedre eksempel er Airbnb, hvor de håndterer hele kjøpsprosessen, også inkludert betaling, selvfølgelig. Det de ikke håndterer er selve leveransen. Den er du nødt til å håndtere med leverandøren på egen hånd. Altså, det er jo ikke Uber som kjører deg rundt, det er jo den taxisjåføren. Og det var det vi endte opp med å lage. Så vi laget det siste bildet der, veldig fint å liksom plassere oss sammen med Uber og Airbnb da. Men det siste bildet er fra Schibsted og viser hvordan vi laget et system hvor du kan gjennomføre hele bli kundeprosessen på i prinsippet bare få minutter. Denne typen løsninger er ofte laget som en annen form for app. Veldig ofte så kan du gjøre det på bussen, og nettopp denne tilgjengeligheten er kjempeviktig. Så det er noen som kan tenke at ja, men Uber, er det egentlig en markedsplass? Ja, kanskje litt sånn, man kan spørre, er det leverandør eller en markedsplass? Jeg vil si at det er en markedsplass siden taxisjåførene ikke er ansatt i Uber. Airbnb er i hvert fall en markedsplass. Det vi også ser er at den typen markedsplasser er mye mer spesialisert, har en mye smalere fokus enn de markedsplassene som er mer sånn generisk. Man kan si at for eksempel AliExpress er jo også en sånn markedsplass. Det er jo ganske generell, selv om de De selger jo ikke biler og sånn, de selger elektronikk. Og så viste det seg at hvis vi hadde gjort dette her, så hadde det heller ikke kommet til å gå bra. For det noe som gjenstår her. Noen av våre kunder har penger plassert i, ja, vi har kunder som har plassert penger i over 30 banker. Nettopp for å spre pengene sine. Hvis du drar til Åsen Sparebank, så får du ikke satt inn 1 milliard. Du får satt inn 20 millioner. Og sånn, men de gir veldig god rente på de 20 millionerne. Så det kan være et veldig godt poeng å spre pengene sine over veldig mange banker. Kanskje alle bankene i Norge. Noen av kundene våre forsøker seg på det da. Og da får du en annen type problematikk, nemlig å håndtere det her i ettertid. Hvis du har satt inn penger i 30 banker, og du skal føre regnskap en gang i måneden, så må du logge deg inn i 30 nettbanker. Og selv om du heldigvis nå har bank i det, sånn at du slipper å ha 30 sånne små dongles, så det likevel en kjempejobb. Og det leder oss egentlig til fase 4 i markedsplasser, som jeg hadde ikke noe navn på den, så jeg bare kalte det for livssyklus, men det en løsninger som håndterer hele livssyklusen til det produktet du kjøper. Det finnes noen veldig gode kjente eksempler på det. Veldig godt eksempel jo Steam. Der går du inn, og så logger du inn, og så kjøper du spill, og så spiller du spillene i Steam, og så kan du kan jo til og med, jeg tror kanskje du kan selge dem også, men du kan i hvert fall kjøpe nye spill og så videre, og det finnes masse tilleggstjenester. Egentlig alt du trenger for å holde på med spill, finner du i Steam. På samme måte kan vi trekke frem Coinbase for eksempel, for kryptovaluta. Du kjøper kryptovalutaen der, og du selger den der, og så videre. Og Spotify er også et godt eksempel på det. Spotify er jo en markedsplass for musikk. De markedsplassene er jo ofte uhyre smal, men det er jo en type markedsplasser som likevel gir deg på en måte en helhetsopplevelse, eller et totaltilbud da, knyttet til det du kjøper. I Fixit så håndterer vi det ved at vi også fungerer som en slags nettbank, en slags supernettbank. Da. Så du kan gå inn hvis du har gjort innskudd gjennom Fixit, så kan du gå inn i Fixit, og så finner du alle innskuddene dine der. Og der finner du alle rapporter, alt du trenger for å håndtere. Du trenger aldri å snakke med banken. Det er en av de tingene vi reklamerer med. Da. Det er noe de folk er veldig glad for. De vil aldri snakke med banken. Og så skal vi se, ja, det var den siste, ja. Så kan man jo tenke hvordan de markedsplassene er vist som i fase 3 og 4 her. I hvert fall i fase 4, de dreier seg om digitale ting. Musikk og ting som leveres. Jeg tror at vi vil se den typen markedsplasser etter hvert også for fysiske ting. Man kan jo for eksempel tenke seg en markedsplass for biler, hvor du går inn og finner den bilen du skal kjøpe, og så betaler du for den der. Du får den selvfølgelig levert, det skjer ikke digitalt, men så kan du bestille lading for eksempel, oversikt over bensin eller service og alt du trenger, og når du skal selge den igjen, så selger du den der også. Hvis jeg tar det som et eksempel og med hensikt, så kan man jo også stille seg spørsmålet, er ikke det Tesla gjør allerede? Du får jo en app, og du kan gjøre alle tingene digitalt. Men Tesla er ikke en markedsplass. Tesla er en leverandør. Og jeg tror det er et veldig viktig poeng når vi nå ser liksom fremover, at vi ser at de tingene som kommer til å overleve best, det er de markedsplassene som på en eller annen måte klarer å vedlikeholde en form for uavhengighet. For hvis Tesla og BMW og Audi og alle de her lager hver sine løsninger for de tingene her, så sitter vi jo egentlig igjen tilbake i middelalderen, hvor du måtte reise ut til hver enkelt gård. Du må på en måte bestemme deg for hvilken leverandør du skal ha, og så må du reise til den leverandøren, og det er der du får tjenesten. Gode markedsplasser kan ikke ha den typen bindinger, de kan ikke ha den typen eksklusivitet. Jeg tror det er også et problem med markedsplasser som for eksempel Disney Plus eller Netflix, når de spiller på eksklusivitet. Nettopp det at de ikke klarer å være uavhengige leverandører og nøytrale leverandører. Finner vi markedsplasser som faktisk er det, så kommer vi til å foretrekke dem, fordi det er det som er gunstig for sluttbrukeren til syvende og sist. Det er ikke noe poeng for oss å skulle ha de her tjenestene hvor vi går til hver enkelt leverandør for å få de tjenestene som er unike for den leverandøren. Det var det jeg tenkte jeg skulle si. I hvert fall om markedsplasser, sånn umiddelbart.
Ja, det var veldig interessant det også. Tusen takk.
Ja.
Da er nå, altså tida flyr når man hører på spennende ting, så vi må bare gå videre til siste punkt på agendaen. Men tusen takk Sigurd. So I will switch back to English now. For our last point on the agenda, I will invite my colleague Agnes Stenbom to the stage. Agnes she has the past few years been leading Schibsted's work on responsible AI. And in addition to leading this work, she's actually taken a doctor or a PhD in AI, journalism, and hybridization. So we haven't actually been able to talk so much about what she's actually doing. So I'm really curious to learn more about your work, Agnes.
Perfect opportunity.
Great.
I hope I don't have the first mic. I think this is good. Yes, hybridization.
Yes.
We're going to live translate. We were planning to do this I'm Swedish, you're Norwegian. We were going to do it in Svorsk, but we'll live translate to English. So my work is about hybridization, which is basically the interplay between human beings and technical systems. We talk a lot about technology and we talk a lot about human beings, but we rarely talk about them as an interplay, as a relationship that we really need to manage and think about if we want to make sense and capture the value or capture the potential of all these technologies that we've been hearing about today. Christopher said he wanted a week to talk about the metaverse. I want a doctorate to talk about hybridization, but we'll do with a few minutes now.
Yeah, I'm just like, yeah, what is it? What is hybridization? It's I feel like I should know, but I don't know.
So it's a term that's used a lot in academia, and somehow academics tend to use a very different language than the people who actually work in practice. But it's a word that's caught on, and what it represents is, so again, the interplay between human beings and machines, and specifically the difference between the two and how we can make sense of the best part of both. So it's a term that we use to describe this digital transformation, and it's an ambition to use digital opportunities in the most meaningful, effective way. And that means that we want to use or make the most out of machines and the most out of human beings and the competence that we have. So really seeing the differences in the two and using them where they respectively make the most sense.
Because then my follow-up question to you would be like, okay, so you talk about human competencies and then you talk about machine competencies. What's the difference? What's a human competency versus a machine competence today?
So we can use an example. So my work is about AI and journalism. So if we think about hybridization in that context, we can think about how AI systems are extremely skilled at looking at this stuff, looking at binary numbers, looking at huge data sets, looking at vast information databases. It could be looking at stories in statistics. So a great example is from this reporting that was made on a big embezzlement story. There's a woman called Isabel dos Santos, who's an Angolan heiress, arvtagerska. Yep. And she embezzled millions and millions of dollars, she and her family, over the course of time. So in Angola, millions and millions, even billions of dollars, that's a lot of money from a country that doesn't have a lot. So huge news story, but it's one that's really hard to grasp from a human perspective. But if you're using AI, and in this case, they use machine learning to look at thousands, I think it's 400,000 different transactions to look for patterns in what kind of transactions were made, from who to who, from where to where. and they could see patterns in this big embezzlement story. And that's a type of investigation that a human eye could never do. And then if you look at a human competence, and a story that a machine could never do could be to empathize. So the heart in this picture, that's something that machines are really bad at least for now. But we are empathic, or most of us are empathic beings. We're a species that's made to connect and to build tribes and to really think and care about each other and see the nuances in the experiences that we have. So a unique human competence could be to really see the individual and see the nuances in that lived reality. So that's a difference. But then hybridization is really the interplay between those two competences and how we make the most out of that. And it's a relationship, and it's like a human-to-human relationship. If you put two people together, neither of them stays the same as they were before, right? We change with every relationship that we have. It's the same with hybridization. If we're putting a human and a machine together, or humans as a species and machines as a concept together, naturally, we're going to change a bit. So the things that we do as humans are likely to change when we have new technological opportunities.
Get it. Very interesting. I'm just curious, because when you start involving machines and machine concepts, there is, like, we humans, we can work with risk, or we can we think we can assess the risk factors involved. How do you? I know that you have developed this network called the risk or a risk assessment for this, the FAST method in Schibsted. What is it, and how do we actually ensure that we're not like letting the machines actually taking risks that we can't stand behind?
Yeah, so that's one of the human competences that we have, where, I mean, human beings, we're the creators of technology, so we build the technologies, but we're also the people who set the goals for the technologies, understand the context that we're going to use them in, and are able to analyze the risks. So again, I'm coming from an AI perspective. AI systems are not just magically going to be empathic or going to think about risks and social effects. But human beings, we can do that. So we have a responsibility to do that as well if we build these systems. So at Schibsted this past year, we've developed a framework. It's part of our AI strategy, our ambition to use AI in meaningful ways in Schibsted. We've developed this framework that we call the FAST framework. And FAST represents, it's an acronym, so it represents 4 areas. It's fairness, accountability, sustainability, and transparency. And those are 4 areas where we know, or we've started to learn a lot in the past few years about quite significant risks related to AI technologies. Some of you might have read stories about racist AIs or gender stereotypes being encoded or embedded into AI systems. Those are the types of risks that we really want to avoid when we use or build AI systems, both because it's ethically despicable, but also because it's frankly a poor product experience. It's a bad product if it's not performing in the ways that we intended it to. So we have these 4 areas where we want to assess risks, and we created a framework to help our teams do that. So we have principles, big fluffy words like all companies have nowadays, but then we have this buffet or smorgasbord of questions where a team who might be working with AI can go and talk, discuss, act very human, and empathize with each other and talk about the system that they're trying to build or use, to think about the risks or the possible pitfalls related to each of these principles.
I understand. Do you understand?
If you have questions about this framework, you can learn all about it on, I think it's all published on Schibsted.com, and you can also reach out to any of us to talk about it.
Yeah, and thank you. So very interesting to hear about your work that I probably should have heard a lot more about previously.
We are very close colleagues.
Very close colleagues. But do we want to? This was the last part of the scheduled agenda. Do we have any questions for Agnes specifically? If not, I think we have a question from the back. Fire away.
Yeah, so the question was if there's any examples of where there's a conflict between humans and machines. And I'm going to interpret that as a conflict in Schibsted because we have tons of those, so I can share one. So we're trying to use AI in meaningful ways in journalism. And journalism is a domain and a profession where facts are extremely important. Getting it right is basically our business. So when we try to use AI in journalism, it's really important that the system that we use gets it right. So we had this experiment, this is 3 years ago now, where we tried to build an AI system, a generative AI system, a machine learning system, that was going to create search engine optimized, so SEO headlines for one of our biggest news brands in Sweden. So we have 5 million people who, 4 million people, somewhere between 4 and 5 million people who consume content from this brand every day. So it's a big deal. And we wanted to help our journalists so that they wouldn't have to spend their days writing headlines that were optimized for an algorithm, a headline that was optimized for Google. Not super meaningful work for a journalist, one might think, or they said to us at least. So we said, okay, what if we try to get a machine to do this? A machine could talk to a machine. And we built this super cool NLG model that was able to create search engine optimized headlines in Swedish. So quite an achievement 2019. We were super proud of this example or this model that we had created. But when we started testing it out, we saw that not every headline was exactly right. So in the beginning, it looked really great. It got everything seemed right. But when you started comparing the headline to the actual story, sometimes the sender of a quote was swapped for someone who was more like friendly or clickable. We had this one case where, you know, the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, she had said that climate strikes should be done during school hours, otherwise it's not a strike, right? But in the article about her, she was this person now saying you should only strike on your free time, which is the opposite to what she was saying. So in that case, we had spent lots of time, lots of energy, lots of money on developing a system that was technically really exciting, but for a journalist who's in the business of getting it right, unusable, terrible, because you couldn't trust that the next headline was going to be factually correct. So there we had this friction between different logics of what success looks like. Because for the machine, it was a successful case. We were generating language. But for a journalist, the facts weren't there, and you couldn't trust the system. So those are the kind of relationships where we really need to understand the friction and understand where we might use the human competence in a meaningful way to kind of fact check or to rethink a case. Yeah? You could, if you trust that the machine gets the facts right. So again, the hybridization in the trust, the human beings need to trust that system if they're going to act as fact checkers for us. But that's definitely an interesting opportunity. If somebody here wants to build a business around that, that might be a good idea.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time. I think you can just stay on the stage, but I will invite everyone who have been to the stage up, and Natalie and Anne. Because I think now we want to open up for questions. So if you have questions to any of the speakers, you can ask them in plenum. Otherwise, the people you see here, plus Anne, who is not on stage, we work for Schibsted, and we can answer all questions like outside of the Future State Report as well. If you're curious in Schibsted, what we do, how we work, how it is to work in Schibsted, and so on. So do we have any, are there any unanswered questions from the audience? Yes.
So there's a lot of examples.
Okay, so the question was if there is any project, metaverse, that is good for society, and if we see any examples of those kind of projects. Chris, I think you're...
Maybe I can kick it off. I think it really comes back to how we define... I'm just going to put it on. I think it comes back to how we define the metaverse, right? If we take the example of immersive 3D experiences, there's a pretty famous story from, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, of a young guy playing World of Warcraft, terminally ill young man who his parents, when he passed away, his parents were quite sad because they thought his funeral would be so poorly attended, but it turned out that actually 20 or 30 people flew from around the world. These were his World of Warcraft clan members, and they were so completely surprised that he had built such a rich social life in the last years of his life. So that's an example of how that type of new forms of connection enable, new forms of connection. They enable people to meet people and build relationships they wouldn't otherwise be able to have. And then thinking a bit more speculatively, if we kind of walk back from that immersive 3D sort of hype-filled vision of the metaverse, you know, even just simple things like reading a newspaper article in the morning and your kid starts crying and you need to get everybody out the door to work, but the second you sit in your car to drive, the article is automatically being read to you by a voice as you sit down. So there's these small moments of convenience where you have these sort of touch points that are stretched across new interfaces that are really going to open up new ways of interacting with technology. And even when you start thinking about, machine learning and AI and all of the different abilities that will bring to our technical systems, like I just don't think we don't have an answer yet. But I think asking questions like that is a really important part of making sure we're on track. Yeah. Anyone else up here want to try the headset?
I think you've pressed it now.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, there's... That's a very good question. Natalie, do you want to take that? So the question was, if you have a startup, if you are working for a startup and you're interested in Schibsted as an investor, how does that work? How do you find information, and how's the process? So Natalie.
There is actually some information on Schibsted.com. Also, there is financial services and venture where you can go with all of that. You need for that contact. Yes.
Yeah. So if the sound wasn't on for those listening in online, we said that, well, first of all, you can find information for who to contact directly on Schibsted.com. But we will also, if we're here in Trondheim, we will look into the opportunity to come back and have more of an investment startup focus rather than a tech focus as we've had today. But I would say go to Schibsted.com and there are some contact info there. Otherwise, you've seen our faces. Our info is in the meeting link. We can send you in the right direction. Great. we have another question. Yes.
When it's here, what does it open? Start.
Yeah. So the question is, there's a lot of talk about the metaverse. When is it here? When does it start? It's been a hype for years. What's the timeline here?
Then I would really recommend you to read John Radoff's work, who's one of the guys whose quotes I used in the work. His 7 layers, he actually uses that as a assessment tool. So it's a value statement on his part, what makes the metaverse, and maybe you can make your own sort of judgments about those different elements. But he holds that up to different companies and different services that are available today and says, how much does it satisfy the infrastructure layer? How much does it satisfy the creator economy layer? And basically by walking yourself through those 7 layers, you can start to see, okay, Unity is building something that is very metaverse-like, but it doesn't have a creator economy. Where Roblox, for example, has a very strong creator economy, but maybe not a decentralized architecture for its technology. So you can start to see different elements and assess, okay, where are we succeeding and where do we still have work to do? But I think it's going to be a patchwork, and I think it really is going to be like the cyberspace, and it's going to be like the information superhighway, and we will laugh that we called it the metaverse for so long, and it will be something new and emergent and different, even if it shares the same name. So please.
Yes.
I think the question was brilliant because you asked, when is it coming to Norway? And just to... Then I have to put the headset back on him. I'll stick to my question and then I'll give it back to him. I was just going to comment that I think it's when we talk about these technologies, it's easy to think of it as this external force that's just suddenly going to appear here. But the metaverse or AI or any other tool platform, it's going to come to Norway when people in Norway start using it, start building it, when people in environments like this find it worthwhile to explore and engage. So I think it's important when we talk about technology that it's not something out there in Silicon Valley or in China, but it's ours. We're the ones who create it. So it's coming when we want to, or we want it to. Who is the leading metaverse actor in Norway?
Again, it comes back to our definition. So we talk a lot today about consumer-facing experiences related to the metaverse. That's sort of Schibsted's bread and butter. We're a consumer-facing company. But Norway has a huge expertise in engineering, in technology for engineering companies as well. So when you look to things that are available in an industrial context, there's a lot of leading firms building what are called digital twins today in Norway. And these are data-driven simulations of, for example, oil platforms or wind farms or other industrial installations. And many of them actually use machine learning and AI tools to do predictive analytics. If this valve fails in 2 weeks, what will happen to the installation here? So there's a lot of really technically fluent teams building examples like that. But of course, those are small examples, they're proprietary and they're closed. So we don't see them in the public discourse in the same way that we do things like Meta announcing some new Pixar vision. But that's an example of a very concrete example of a small metaverse that's very functional and does, to answer the question again, potentially provide some good if it's helping prevent accidents and do sort of preventative maintenance on high-risk installations. And that's something Norway does very well.
Thank you. Good answers and good questions. So I think we are about to round off this. It stretched a bit over an hour, but I think at least personally it was not biased at all, but it was very interesting and very amazing speakers. We will continue to stay here for a while. So if you have questions for us about Schibsted or the topics that we've talked to, we would love to mingle and talk and discuss with you. We are very invested in these topics. And as you have heard with the amount of passion they have when they talk about these different topics, it's something that we like to discuss. So please approach us if you have questions or just want to debate or discuss. And thank you for really great presentations, all of you.
Thank you for hosting. Please.
You're welcome.